Any major operation will normally use a general anesthetic. It also involves a surgical team to do the operation and an anesthetic team to keep the patient alive during the operation. The ventilator here is breathing for him and delivering a controlled anesthetic gas mixture. This situation is very different. What would happen here if there was an uncontrolled release of gases which caused anesthesia? Some compounds in crude and condensate give off vapors which, in a confined space, can act as anesthetics. This film gives some background to the danger that exists and looks at Analox Hyper Gas, which can offer protection from those dangers. We'll also show how to respond to contamination in the diving bell. Tests on vapors above samples of crude and condensate in a confined space have shown that they have almost double the amount of anesthetic needed to put someone out for an operation. But in the diving bell, there will be no team or equipment to help a person survive. Without that support, breathing just half the vapors which might be there would be fatal. This is a flowchart of the things that'll happen to you in such a situation. The pathway you take will depend on many things, but the end point is always the same: death. If you reach the condition indicated by the colored boxes, it's unlikely that you'd survive. To add to the problem, even before you reach that condition, the action of the vapors on the brain will make it impossible for you to follow instructions from others or to carry out the simplest activity to rescue yourself. These divers are in a bell which has been contaminated by hydrocarbon vapors. The one on the left has been told to put on breathing apparatus. He seems fully conscious, but he's totally unable to carry out such a very familiar procedure for a diver. These men survived because a third diver arrived back at the bell, realized there was a problem, and kept his helmet on. He was able to follow instructions from the surface and get the bell back to safety. Some of the vapors cause seizures at as little as 30% of the level which would cause anesthesia. It's been shown that with contamination at just 35% of the level required for surgical anesthesia, half of all individuals won't be able to respond to verbal commands. The hypergas was developed by Analox in conjunction with Unimed Scientific Limited. The Analox Hyper Gas is a fast-response hydrocarbon monitor specifically designed to respond to the vapors common in the oil industry, particularly those in crude and condensate. Our bodies seem to respond to these vapors as if the effect of each one is added to the effect of the others. So, if there were 4 vapors, each of them at a quarter of the level which would cause convulsions, together they'd cause a convulsion. The hypergas adds up the vapors in the same way. The effect on the body can be very fast, just a few breaths. The hypergas is designed to respond in less than 10 seconds. It's got visible and audible alarms which fire as soon as the total vapor level reaches 10% of the anesthetic level. Later, we'll look at how the hypergas works and how you should respond to it. The alarm at the 10% level will give you time to put on breathing apparatus with a supply of clean gas. The equipment consists of a unit which is mounted in the diving bell and a topside repeater which provides a copy of the alarm status of the hypergas to the topside team. There are various things to consider when you're deciding where to put the hypergas in the bell. It has to be sighted so that it is not hit during normal activities. A diver's helmet can deliver quite a blow. It mustn't be hit with water from the umbilicals, so it should be part of the way up the bell. Hydrocarbon vapors are heavier than air, so they'll collect low down. But the movements of the divers in the bell, together with the gas movement caused by the scrubber and heater, will cause some gas mixing, so it's okay to sight the hypergas higher to avoid water. It should be placed where you can see its lights, flow meter and LCD. Here you can see that the hypergas has some protection from NOx by a Mara panel. This is not a good place to put the hypergas. just above the diver's seat. It can be knocked by his helmet and his bailout bottles. In this situation, the hypergas is protected to some extent by the through-water comms box. The hypergas needs a nominal 24-volt DC power supply, which is connected here. The red and black wires carry the power supply. The bell unit is connected to the topside unit through a single twisted pair within the umbilical. The green and white wires are for communications. When it's switched on, the indicator lights and audible alarm will pulse 4 times. It then takes 40 seconds for the sensor to warm up. The lights stay on and the LCD reads cold. At the end of this time, the hypergas is monitoring for hydrocarbons and the green OK light will flash once a second. Should the LCD stop functioning, it doesn't mean that the unit isn't working. As long as the green OK is showing, everything's all right. This is what the hypergas looks like when it's fully functional. The pump inside the hypergas draws gas over the sensor. There's a flow meter which indicates the flow. If the flow's interrupted, an amber warning light appears and the alarm buzzer makes a continuous sound. This is the no-flow light and buzzer. The buzzer can be silenced, but the light will stay on until the flow's restored. During a bell run, the responsible person topside should ask for the following information: flow meter reading, LCD reading and details of which lights are on. This information should be entered into the dive log. If the hydrocarbon vapors reach the set level, the red alarm light comes on and the buzzer makes a pulsed sound. The reading on the LCD has increased. This buzzer can be silenced. Notice as the gas level is cleared, the LCD reading drops. Next, we will show what your response should be when the gas alarm sounds. Put on your breathing apparatus right away. Don't check the LCD, don't check with topside, don't do anything until you're safely on BA. Once everybody is on BA, the buzzer can be silenced so that communication with topside is clear. The red light will continue to show. The buzzer will come back on in 5 minutes if the contamination level hasn't dropped. The details of what happens next will depend on company procedures, but there are several possible actions. The bell should be flushed. If required, a sample of the bell gas can be taken in a specially prepared cylinder to be analysed later. This could help to identify the source of contamination. The source of contamination in the bell must be removed as it'll continue to off gas until it is. The bell may need to return to the dive system so that the contamination can be cleaned up. Stay on BA until the source of contamination has been removed. Check that the LCD reading's coming down. It must be close to the previous clean bell reading before you come off BA. Don't take off your BA until you've checked with topside. As soon as possible, the data stored in the hypergas must be downloaded. This can be done from the topside unit. If there isn't one, the bell unit must be carefully locked out and the data downloaded from that. It should then be copied to a CD, clearly labelled and retained. Before the bell is used for another run, the hypergas must be installed and working, and the LCD reading must be down to the level recorded for the previous clean dive.